Hi, everyone. This is Right to Life of Central California Executive Director John Gerardi. I'm doing a little extra video presentation, just sort of a little setup here in my office that I want to post to YouTube about a special thing that we've done with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fresno. We've released a 7-page document in coordination with the diocese called COVID Vaccines, a Pastoral Guide. And this is jointly issued between us and Bishop Joseph Brennan of the Diocese of Fresno. The bishop had been involved in a news story where he had done a little video about COVID vaccines that had raised some questions and caused some confusion about what the actual teaching of the Catholic Church was about COVID vaccines. And as many of our supporters are Catholic, a lot of people reached out to me, and people had been reaching out to me with questions before about, what is the connection between COVID vaccines and abortion, if any? And after the bishop's video, which I think came out on November 19th, I got in touch with him, and we worked together, and we worked on a draft document, which I helped research and write, and we just issued it just yesterday. Again, the document's entitled COVID Vaccines, a Pastoral Guide. And I really encourage you, our supporters, to read it. We're going to try to make a version of it that's sort of more generically Christian. This is obviously because it's from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fresno. It's coming from a Catholic position, and I was helping the bishop, in the drafting of it. So for those of you who are not Catholic, you might find some of it not quite relevant to you and your faith tradition, but I think the moral principles that it gives and the factual information it gives about the various kinds of COVID vaccines are very useful. So I want to sort of lay out what it is we're doing in this document and the basic principles it lays out. So the teaching of the Catholic Church on this topic, the Catholic Church has grappled with this for the last few decades. Basically what's happened is various researchers have found it useful in developing vaccines and other healthcare treatments to use various kinds of human tissue. And because it's difficult to sustain human tissue unless it's difficult to sustain human tissue unless it's young and fresh. And so in the 60s and 70s, some researchers took fetal tissue from one or more aborted fetuses. And obviously the abortion of these children was a horrific thing, a horrible thing. But it was a horrible thing. But these cells that were taken from these fetuses were then kept in a lab environment where they could duplicate and duplicate and duplicate and duplicate and produce cell lines. And there are about 3 or 4 of these cell lines that are major cell lines that researchers and pharmaceutical companies use for developing certain kinds of healthcare treatments and vaccines. And so those of us in the pro-life movement have had some concern for several decades. Well, what do we do? Can we take vaccines that are made with cells from these cell lines that originated with an aborted child? So a couple of things to understand about it. One, the way that the Catholic Church views it and the way that I view it, and I think we should all view it. There are some people who, when they hear aborted fetus, cells, vaccine, they immediately think, I'm injecting myself with a dead baby's body. I'm engaging in something along the lines of cannibalism. And that's not the case. While this is human biological material, this is not the body of that child who was aborted. And this is not me rationalizing or justifying the abortion of that child. That was an act of homicide. But this is no longer identifiable as part of that original child's body. And furthermore, using human tissue from one human person to give it to another human person as a healthcare treatment is not akin to cannibalism. If I donate a kidney to someone, that's not cannibalism. The ethics come from, where did that human tissue originate? How did you get that human tissue, okay? If I murder someone to take their kidney, I can't use that kidney. That's seriously immoral, okay? If I'm going to the black market to buy a kidney, that's evil of me. That's immoral of me, okay? Because obviously that kidney was obtained in some sleazy fashion. So that's the ethics of it. That's sort of the core ethical thing that the Catholic Church has certainly grappled with, and I think pro-lifers of goodwill, no matter their religious persuasion, what is the extent to which we could possibly make use of these vaccines if they are unethically sourced and if that's the only option in town? And basically the reasoning of the Catholic Church has been, if you have a serious, proportional health reason, whether for yourself or your child, or you're a doctor prescribing something for patients, and if you have made clear your pro-life position, made clear your position that researchers should not use these materials, okay, that these materials started from an illicit source, from an aborted child, and that pharmaceutical companies, governments, etc., should try to find ethically sourced alternatives. If you make clear, have moral clarity with your pro-life convictions, but if a vaccine made with those unethically sourced cell lines is the only available vaccine, then it can be possible as a form of passive and simply material cooperation, meaning I'm not willing the bad thing that happened, I'm simply in some way giving some kind of passive backwards support to it for something that happened 40 years ago. It's important to note, by the way, these cell lines, they were started, these main cell lines that researchers use for vaccines, they were started in the late 60s and early 70s. So these are 50 years old, a lot of these cell lines. And the original act of abortion is something like 50 years old. And the FDA values those cell lines because they're old. They've had time to be vetted and okayed by the FDA and other regulatory agencies. So the Catholic Church has taught, look, for a serious and proportional reason, if there are no other alternatives, it is morally permissible for people, because you're using that vaccine is not giving the material support that caused that abortion to happen in the first place. You're not incentivizing more abortions. It's basically a kind of passive material cooperation in evil, which in the Church's eyes is something that's morally permissible. Okay, for example, if I go to Target does lots of bad things. Okay, Target and various big companies give money to bad political causes, etc. I'm not sinning. I'm not doing something grievously wrong if I go to Starbucks and get a cup of coffee or whatever. My support for the bad things that they do is extremely minimal and incidental. All right. So that's the teaching of the Catholic Church, the sort of normative teaching. Factually speaking, though, what level of involvement do the various COVID vaccines that are coming out have with abortion? Well, the various COVID vaccines, there's a difference between the various alternatives. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are not made with cells derived from those cell lines that originated from an aborted child. So that's a very positive thing. Now, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna utilized some cells from those lines in the testing phase for their vaccines. That is unfortunate, and that is wrong. That is wrong. It's wrong. The Catholic Church teaches it's wrong to make use of those cells from those cell lines. But it's a relatively minimal and one-time involvement with those unethically sourced cells. Now, this is in contrast to the AstraZeneca, and I'll also add, although this didn't make it into the document in time, the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. These vaccines are made with those unethically sourced cell lines. Now, what the Catholic Church has always taught is, if you don't have any other options available, like in your country, for example, then you can take a vaccine that's made with those unethically sourced cell lines. In our case, in the United States, we're probably going to have alternatives. Okay, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines actually look like they're more likely to get to FDA approval than the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the moral guidance that the bishop is giving, and that we at Right to Life are giving, is if you discern that you have a proportional and serious moral reason to want to take the vaccine, whether you are in an at-risk group, whether you work in an at-risk group, maybe you work in healthcare, maybe you're a caretaker for someone in an at-risk group. If you discern that you have a serious and proportional reason, then it is not necessarily ethically, it could be ethically permissible for you to use one of the COVID vaccines, but use one of the vaccines that has the least involvement with cells from these cell lines, specifically the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So that's kind of that's sort of the main thrust of it. I'd encourage you to read the whole document. So there are two documents. There's a 7-page document and then sort of a 1-page press release that the bishop issued and that we worked on with him. And I'd really encourage you all to give it a look. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact us at Right to Life of Central California. 229-2229 is our phone number, or you can email us info@rtlcc.org. We'll have the bishop's statement up on our website. Thank you all so much for listening to this message. I hope it was informative for you, and feel free to share this with friends and family and whoever else might be interested in the topic. Thank you, and God bless.